All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about decimal place value today. But before we get there, let's just review some old-fashioned whole number place value. You probably remember these cubes from elementary school. They're called base 10 blocks, and what they do is they talk to us about place value. For example, if we have these two cubes sitting out there alone, we could just simply say that we have two groups of one individual cube. That, of course, equals 2. Here we see that the cubes are in groups of 10. In fact, we have 4 groups of 10. That equals 40 cubes, right? So we think of this as being the tens place because they're coming in groups of 10. Here the cubes are coming in groups of 100. This large sheet here, that's 10 cubes by 10 cubes. That's 100 cubes. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. They come in groups of 100. There are 4 groups of 100. That, of course, equals 400 cubes. And this large group right here, that's one group of 1,000, right? So one group of 1,000 equals 1,000. So you can probably look at this and tell how many cubes there are in this entire drawing or this entire diagram, right? I hope you can see that there are 1,442 cubes in total. Now, it's place value that tells us that this 1 doesn't mean 1 cube, but it actually means 1,000 cubes. And this 4 doesn't mean 4 cubes, it actually means 400 cubes. And that this 4 means 4 groups of 10, and this 2 just means, well, 2 cubes. It's just the ones place where the digit actually represents the number. This 2 means 2 cubes. This 4, this digit 4, actually has a different value. It represents 40. That's what we call place value. All right, so let's see how that looks with decimals. Here's a decimal number, right? This is the ones place. I know this is the ones place, right? And I know that this number isn't 234. I know that this is the ones place because of this guy right here. That decimal tells me that to the left is the ones place, right? So that means 2 groups of 1. Of course, that equals 2. This decimal also tells me that to the right is the tenths place. Tenths place with a THS at the end. That represents 3 groups of 1/10 or 3/10. Next to that, farther to the right, is the hundredths place. That shows me, or this number means that there are 4 groups of 1/100th, right? It's getting to be these really small fractions. These decimal places are quite small. That equals 4 hundredths. Now it's a little confusing now. What would we call this number? Would we call it 2 and 3/10 and 4 hundredths? No. Remember, what we're going to do is we're going to add these two fractions together, right? In order to add 3/10 to 4 hundredths, we need a common denominator. And hopefully you know that 3/10 is equivalent to 30 hundredths. We could change the denominator to 100 easily just by multiplying the numerator and the denominator by 10. Now we have a common denominator. And 30 hundredths and 4 hundredths equal 34 hundredths. So what we have is 2 is our whole number, and 34 hundredths is the fraction. Now, this is how we'd write it as a mixed number. This is how we write it as a decimal, right? I'm going to write that out for you. 2, and they're pronounced the same way, and 34 hundredths. 34 hundredths. Now, you're not going to be writing it as a fraction every time. So how do you remember the denominator? How do you know what the denominator is? Well, it's simple. You just pronounce this number, 34, all the numbers behind the decimal, 34, and then you say the last place value. That's the hundredths place. That would be our common denominator, 34 hundredths. Let's take one last example here. This would be written, right? So, well, let's back up a second. Here we have the tens place, right? Remember, this is the tens. This is the ones. The decimal is always pronounced as and, just like in a mixed number. And now we're going to pronounce the last number here, the whole number here, 56. 56, I forgot the Y. 56, and then we say, excuse me, starting to lose it here, 56, and then we say the last place value. That's the hundredths place, hundredths. Right? So 24 and 56, and then we say the last place value, hundredths. Okay, that's it for today. Decimal place value.